If you can fly this helicopter, I'll marry you. Right here, right now. Aidan Lockwood said it without blinking, without half a second of hesitation, as if he were closing another investment deal, not throwing out a marriage challenge to the woman standing before him. His voice was deep, cold, not loud but powerful enough to overpower the howling wind on the helipad atop the International Financial Center. No one dared breathe too hard. Silence fell for exactly 0.5 seconds. Then his team of assistants behind him burst out laughing in unison, as if their boss had just granted permission to enjoy a free piece of entertainment. A janitor, a woman in a cheap uniform, hands still faintly smelling of floor cleaner, standing small among suits worth $10,000, and daring to say 3 words, "I can fly." Aidan didn't believe in love, and he believed even less that any human emotion in this world could ever change someone's fate. Twice betrayed, once by a business partner, once by the woman he thought he would marry, he had learned that every promise could be broken. Even love, only contracts survive. So when Maya appeared and said, "I can fly," Aidan didn't get angry, didn't snap. He simply smiled. A smile, not childish mockery, but the most refined kind of disdain a wealthy man can offer someone he is certain will never breathe the same air as him. "If you can fly this helicopter, I'll marry you, right here." And it wasn't a joke, it was a verdict. A velvet-wrapped blade, a declaration of power. But everything Aidan expected did not happen. The woman, Maya called her, did not blush, did not freeze, did not show fear, nor did she try to look strong. On her face, there was only one thing, an old pain. Ancient, so old it was silent. A silence not of the weak, but of someone who has once lost something in this world that can never be taken back again. Maya didn't respond, didn't look at Aidan. She simply and quietly dropped her rubber gloves onto the concrete floor. Then walked straight toward the helicopter. No permission, no waiting for orders, no looking at anyone. In that moment, the assistants' laughter shattered, not because they believed Maya could actually fly, but because they could feel she wasn't getting on that helicopter as a joke, and something in the way her shoulders moved made their mockery suddenly sound off-key. Aidan raised an eyebrow. He had seen many kinds of defiance, met women who pretended not to care just to be noticed, witnessed countless people willing to make a spectacle just to enter his line of sight. But Maya's eyes were not for him. Not even for anyone still living. They were the eyes of someone bound by a vow to something already gone. Not to win, but to never betray what lives deep within herself. And in that moment, even if he wouldn't admit it yet, Aidan saw, for the first time in his life, a person who didn't need his gaze to exist. This wasn't a power play. It was a silent collision between 2 wounds that had never healed. And when Maya placed her hand on the control stick, just as the rotor was about to spin, a truth Aidan had never once considered suddenly slipped into his mind. This moment is no longer a game of power. It's a doorway into memories that neither she nor I ever wanted to reopen. This flight would not merely lift someone off the ground, it would drag them both down to the deepest part of their own past. The moment the helicopter door closed behind Maya, Aidan caught sight of something he never expected to see on the shoulders of a janitor. The aura of someone who had already lost so much that there was nothing left to fear losing. He had seen shoulders like that once before, on a woman he had once loved to the point of madness. The one who walked away on the day he thought he was going to propose. That day, Aidan had slipped the ring into his vest pocket and arrived at her place earlier than planned, just to surprise her. But what he saw was her standing before a mirror, speaking into the phone. "He really does love me, but he's stupid enough to think I love him back. The investment contract is almost done. Once it's closed, I'm gone." Aidan didn't walk in, didn't confront her. He simply left the ring on the doorstep and walked away in silence. From that moment on, in the deepest part of him, every declaration of love became a transaction. Sincerity, nothing more than a foolish hallucination. From that day on, he stopped making decisions with emotion, stopped believing in anyone's eyes. He rebuilt himself according to the pure logic of the market. If something can be converted into money, it has an expiration date. And if something cannot be measured in profit, it simply doesn't exist. Every woman who appeared in his life after that left at the exact moment he began to care, only reinforcing his belief that betrayal is not an accident, but instinct. And Maya, at the very moment Aidan was remembering his own wound, found herself remembering a night many years ago. The last night, she dared to stand behind a cockpit, believing that someone was watching over her from the ground. He was another pilot, who had promised he would return with her after their final test flight. Maya was aware that the test that day carried risk, but she was the one who said, "We have to fly," because if they postponed once more, the project would lose funding, and the entire team would be disbanded. The helicopter had encountered a malfunction in high-altitude turbulence. Maya managed to regain control and save the entire crew. But the man on the ground, the one seated at the coordination console, was struck by shrapnel from the engine explosion during the emergency landing. Maya had been only 10 meters away, and all she could do was watch him die right before her eyes. The sound of his body hitting the ground was a bone-splitting crack she could never forget. And to this day, the moment any engine roars too loudly, that memory rips itself wide open. From that night on, she never touched a cockpit again. Not because she was afraid of flying, but because she believed it was her decision that killed the man she loved most. She no longer allowed herself to love anyone. She was unworthy. Anyone she loved would never remain safe. Two people. One who believes love is a lie. One who believes love is a curse. Both see the very concept of love as the executioner of their soul, but they stand at opposite ends of it. Aiden kills emotion to survive. Maya sentences herself never to love again, to atone. One rejects love because he was betrayed. One rejects love because she believes she is the betrayer. In the way Aiden looked at Maya in that moment, it wasn't the gaze of a man judging social class. It was the recognition of something achingly familiar. Too familiar, even if he couldn't yet name it. As if he knew, with absolute clarity, that she wasn't getting on that helicopter to prove her capability. She was doing it because it was the only way not to betray something that was once holier than life itself. She was not asking for his approval, just as he had never needed anyone's approval either. On that rooftop, the two of them stood not on the same level of society, but on the same truth, one that only those abandoned by love in the most ruthless way could ever understand. There are people in this world who are not afraid of dying. They are only afraid of loving the wrong person again. Maya didn't wait for permission. She placed her hand on the control stick like someone slipping back into the rhythm already etched into her bloodstream. No system checks, no request to initiate. Every motion so precise that the automated sensors activated in sync with her before she even touched the main control panel. Aiden had seen exceptional pilots, but they always had to think a beat before they acted. Maya did not. She wasn't flying the helicopter. She was returning to it. When the rotor began to spin, there was no violent burst of air tearing through the sky like every takeoff Aiden had ever known. Instead, it sounded like a heartbeat, steady, quiet, unhurried. The helicopter didn't launch upward. It left the ground as if lifted by pure will. No tremor, no tilt, not even by a microscopic degree. Aiden intended to lean back as always, projecting calm authority, the posture of a man in control of the game. But by the third second after liftoff, he was already sitting upright. Not from the force, but from the sudden awareness that he no longer had the right to lean on anything powered by his own status. It wasn't the aircraft carrying them. It was Maya, carrying herself, and he was merely a witness. Maya said nothing, didn't look back, and it was clear she wasn't trying to appear calm. This wasn't the composure of restraint. It was the stillness of someone with nothing left to lose. For a split second, as the light flickered across the glass, Aiden saw her eyes reflected in the cabin mirror, not the eyes of someone exploring the sky, but of someone returning to the place where a piece of her soul had died. The sky ahead wasn't a destination. It was a door, a bridge, a place she had to return to, even knowing the other side was a void. Every time she tilted the stick, there was no flourish, no display, only the quiet emphasis of a wordless conversation with someone Aiden instinctively knew was no longer alive. He sat in the rear, and for the first time in his life, he didn't analyze skill, didn't measure performance, didn't evaluate safety. He listened, even though there was no sound. And in that moment, he realized something terrifying. Maya wasn't flying to win. She wasn't flying to prove herself. She didn't see Aiden. She didn't see this world. She was speaking to the dead. To her, the sky was not freedom. The sky was a graveyard where only she remained to speak the final words. What froze Aiden wasn't her technique, but the truth that she was loving someone who was already dead in a way no living person could ever understand. A fleeting instant. The helicopter tilted exactly 1 degree to evade a surge of cold air from the troposphere. The movement was so fluid, the machinery itself might have mistaken it for instinct. But in that second, Aiden sensed something beyond language. Maya wasn't avoiding the wind for safety. She avoided it as if to shield someone beside her, someone he could not see. If a person flies as though they are protecting the memory of the dead, then all comparisons of skill, class, limits, power become meaningless. Because that person is not flying with ability, but with a vow. Aiden no longer saw Maya as someone accepting a challenge out of pride. He saw her as a survivor, performing a final rite for a piece of her soul that no longer belonged to the living. And for the first time, Aiden did not feel himself standing in the position of the judge. He simply felt he was beside someone who did not need forgiveness, but deserved to be left in peace. During those 12 minutes in the air, he never once thought about the words he had spoken. "If you can fly this helicopter, I'll marry you." Now, the words no longer carried mockery, but felt like the single vow between two souls who had once died in misaligned timelines. The helicopter touched the pad, and Maya unbuckled her harness, stepping out before the rotor had even fully stopped. She didn't look at Aiden, didn't wait for a word, didn't take thanks or payment, as if the flight had never happened. Aiden didn't call her back, didn't say thank you, didn't ask anything. But for the first time, he didn't leave immediately. He stood there, watching, until her silhouette vanished completely from sight. Not because he cared about pride, but because he feared that if he walked away first, he might never find her again. That night, Maya returned to the janitor's apartment as usual. Elena, her younger sister, was already asleep. No questions, no words, a silence so familiar it needed no explanation. But this time, Maya couldn't sleep. Not because of the past, but because, for the first time, she thought about someone still alive. She didn't know why. It wasn't longing, wasn't confusion. Just a small, persistent question echoing in her mind. Is he safe? No reason, no logic. A man like Aiden had an entire security team protecting him. And yet, Maya still couldn't sleep. At that very moment, Aiden was in his high-rise penthouse, where the city skyline existed as nothing more than a field of lights beneath his feet. He didn't pour a drink as usual, didn't play music, didn't shock his nervous system with a cold shower. He just sat there, in the dark, something he had never done before. And in that perfect darkness, the first thought that surfaced in his mind was not about tomorrow's merger contract. It was, did she make it home? A thought even he couldn't understand why he had. But it was so clear that his chest tightened from the fact that he could not answer it. Aiden had seen dozens of women walk out of his life without ever looking back. But never once had he felt afraid of losing someone like he did now. Even though between him and Maya there had never been a single promise, no love, no full name, no shared future, nothing. Except one impossibly irrational truth. If Maya disappeared tonight, he would never forgive himself. This wasn't love. At least, not the kind people usually speak of. It was an instinctive recognition of another human being who had once walked to the edge of death and survived. And Aiden, a man who had never cared for anyone but himself, for the first time, didn't want that person to be alone. The shift happened that very night. If before this, control had been Aiden's only survival instinct, then for the first time, he was afraid of what he couldn't control. Afraid it might already be too late to go back for her. Afraid that somewhere out there, something other than him might be searching for her too. Meanwhile, Maya, when she closed her eyes, didn't hear the sounds of war engines as she always did. She heard a breath, quiet but undeniably real, right behind her. She opened her eyes. No one was there. But the feeling was unlike any of her past hauntings. It wasn't fear. It wasn't a memory. It was the very clear sense that, for the first time in years, someone truly saw her. Not as a threat, not as an instrument, but as a human being. And that is why neither of them could sleep. Not because of longing, but because the fear of losing arrived before emotion had the chance to become love. That night, Aiden returned to the janitor's housing, not because he intended to find Maya, but because he couldn't bear not knowing whether she was still safe. There was no security at the entrance, no cameras. The light was a sickly yellow, bleeding like dirty water. At that very moment, a black SUV with no plates appeared, lights off, gliding into the alley like a hunting animal. Aiden didn't hear the engine, but Maya did. She barely managed to push Elena inside and shut the door just as two men appeared from opposite directions, their movements small, quick, far too professional, not thieves, not junkies. Maya had no time to run, no time to prepare, but her body moved from instinct, the instinct she had spent years trying to bury. In half a second, she understood. This wasn't someone coming for her wallet. This was someone coming to erase a person from existence. Maya's first strike was clean, precise, powerful. But the instant she heard the metallic click of a gun bolt sliding into position behind her, the past ripped open like a blade. The explosion, the smell of burning metal, her body froze, one heartbeat, paralyzed. But this time, someone else reached the bullet first. Aiden didn't have time to think, to calculate, to hesitate. He just moved, hurling himself into Maya as if one fraction of a second too slow, and she would vanish. The impact slammed them both onto the concrete. A bullet tore through the wall behind them. Maya gasped, breath jagged, and for the first time, Aiden saw her not as a warrior, not as someone invincible, but as a human being just touched by the raw, unfiltered terror she had buried for years, too real, too painful to conceal. Aiden positioned himself in front of her, not out of ego, not to prove masculinity. He was truly afraid of losing her. Afraid in the most primal, survival sense of the word. A man who had lived his entire life surrounded by power, for the first time, knew what it meant to fear losing someone who was never even his. Maya looked straight at Aiden, not surprised, not grateful, only helpless with herself, because even against her will, she had dragged someone else into danger meant for her alone. Her hand trembled, not from the fear of dying, but from the terror of someone else paying the price for her existence. And in that instant, both of them fell into a place inside themselves no one had ever reached. No armor, no masks, no performance of strength. Maya spoke, for the first time, not to defend herself, not to shut the world out. I once loved, and the cost was losing everything. She didn't cry, but her voice dropped the air around them to freezing. It wasn't a confession. It was a sentence that had already been served. Aiden didn't comfort her, didn't ask for more. But his eyes changed. No longer the gaze of a man judging from above, but of someone who had just seen the truth. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of someone dying because of her. And he wasn't afraid of being deceived. He was afraid that this time, she would vanish like everyone he had ever tried to hold on to. This wasn't love, wasn't infatuation. It was the moment both of them realized they were people more afraid of loving than of anything else. Neither spoke another word that night. But just a few hours later, the sky called Maya again. This time, not from fear, but from a silence inside her that had finally softened. The main hall of the airshow opened its glass ceiling wide to the sky, clear as a colossal mirror. Maya stepped into the cockpit to the sound of her own light footsteps. No guide, no MC announcing her name, no stage lights tracking her every move. Only the slow, steady return of her heartbeat. The rhythm of someone who had survived long enough to no longer be afraid. She checked the console, flipped the switches, and placed her hand on the controls as if touching a journal long left closed. When the rotor reached full cycle, the helicopter lifted from the ground so gently that the front row spectators looked at one another, exhaled quietly, as if a single loud sound might shatter the moment. Maya wasn't performing. She flew straight. She flew wide. She flew low, then high, each arc a handwritten sentence. Soft, unwavering, effortless. No force, no defense. Every trace of showmanship vanished. There was only one human being reclaiming her name, with nothing but breath and her hands. Aiden stood behind the control zone, no mic in hand, no commands issued, not touching a single priority switch on the tech panel. He listened to the rotor the way one listens to a human being learning to walk into the light without bowing their head. Every time Maya shifted altitude, his eyes followed instinctively. But not to ensure the sponsor logo got the perfect angle, not to measure performance, not to claim he had discovered a prodigy. This time, simply because he was afraid of losing a moment where someone was freeing themselves. When Maya brought the aircraft into a narrow trajectory skimming the runway edge, Aiden drew a long breath. If this had been before, he would have walked onto the stage, seized the mic, and turned this moment into his own narrative. Today, he remained still. Maya lowered altitude, held a perfectly steady hover at the edge of the wind curtain, then set the aircraft onto the runway as if returning a precious thing to where it truly belonged. She shut down the engine, opened the door, stepped out. No wave, no bow, no smile. She walked straight past the yellow line, toward the technical zone, where nameless people usually disappear after finishing their work. Aiden stepped out of the shadows at that exact moment. He didn't call her name, didn't command her to stop in the tone of a man used to being obeyed. He simply stepped forward, stood facing her, at a distance that made it clear. If she wished to turn away, she could, without needing to step aside. Maya stopped. They faced each other. No one spoke first. The distant crowd still murmured in the stands, but that sound echoed back like it came from another city. Aiden slipped his hand into the inner pocket of his vest and felt the small box he had carried since last night. He took it out, not hiding it, not dramatizing it. A simple ring box. No logo, no gleaming luxury. He opened it and left it resting on his palm. He did not kneel. Not yet. He spoke. Low, clear. Not trembling, but not armored either. He said that for years he had called anything that couldn't be measured in profit meaningless. Had treated every promise like a bargaining chip. Had walked out of rooms before anyone could ever see the most breakable part of him. He said he'd trained himself not to believe, and called that wisdom. He said that until today, for the first time, he had seen a person stand upright beneath the sky without borrowing a single ounce of power, without asking permission to exist. He paused, looked into Maya's eyes, and this time, he named exactly what he intended to do. He took one step forward, lowered himself, and came down on one knee, not out of ceremony, but because he wanted, deliberately, to be beneath her once, by choice. He raised the ring box to her hand's height and spoke directly. He said, "I'm asking you to marry me. No metaphors, no poetry, no ornament." He said he wasn't proposing to keep her, wasn't proposing to turn that reckless challenge into a neatly packaged romantic scene. He was proposing to say that from this day forward, if there's ever a place she chooses to return to after flying for herself, he asks permission to simply be the one standing at the door, light on, waiting. No demand, no condition, no contract, only waiting. He said he believes she deserves to be loved again, not as a medal for surviving, but as a natural way to exist. He said if her answer was no, he would still carry this posture within him and would never turn this proposal into a debt or a weapon. He said he was asking for the privilege to spend the rest of his life learning how not to destroy the freedom of the one he loves. Maya listened to every word the way one listens to an engine that has finally stopped roaring. Her face did not change, but in her eyes, there was a soft halo, not tears, something quieter. She looked at the ring, then at the hand of the man kneeling before her. For the first time, she noticed details she had never seen. The faint callus from boxing practice, the shallow scratch from a skateboarding fall years ago, a small scar on his left wrist from a smartwatch that once compressed too tightly. Things that had nothing to do with her, yet suddenly became the only anchors holding her in this exact moment. She exhaled, slowly, not to dramatize, not to stall, but simply to listen, to determine whether the thing beating in her chest was fear or peace. She said she had once loved and lost everything, that she was not ready to build another house of emotion only to watch it burn again. She said people like her should not make promises. She did not speak of the past, did not mention the sky as a graveyard, did not speak of the dead. She said the only truth she could give him right now was this: "I don't know." Then she fell silent. She did not refuse the ring. She did not accept it. She simply let the words remain between them, like an aircraft that has landed, its engine still warm. Aiden nodded. He did not try to salvage the moment with vows. He did not stand. He stayed where he was, so it would not become a performance. Around them, the crowd was only just starting to notice. A few cameras turned, but the tech team moved swiftly to block the angle. The small space around them remained untouched, private. Maya glanced around, not afraid, not avoiding. She reached out, took the box, closed it gently, then placed it back into Aiden's palm. Not rejection, not acceptance. Simply the preservation of the moment. She said she needed to fly again. Not now, not today, but on a day she knew for certain she was flying not to escape. And when that day came, if he was still there, light on at the door, she would know the way back. And if he wasn't, she would not blame him. Aiden received the box, closed it, and rose slowly. He did not touch her. Did not ask for a hug. Did not request a promise. He stepped back, making way. Maya walked past, back straight, steps light. Just before disappearing behind the wing of the stage, she paused, just for one breath. She did not look back. Then she kept walking. The camera lingered on Aiden's face. It was not the face of a man who had won, nor of a man who had been denied. It was the face of someone, who, for the first time, was willing to wait even without knowing if there was anything to wait for. His hand kept the ring box in his pocket, not clenched, not released, simply held. If it were you standing in her place, would you return? Let us know your answer in the comments. Thank you for listening to the story, and we'll see you again.